Click over to the Rockfin side and get Rockfin going. Come on, Rockfin. Do. I don't know why it's always a little bit slower.
I know. That's one thing Rockfin kills me.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and the crazy part about it is even when I do the StreamYard and I just do a Rockfin stream, it always has that little delay. And I'm like, man, I wish they could fix anything, fix that, and I would be over the moon.
I agree. I want them to have an embed too. A live embed would be cool.
Yeah, that's true. That too. All right, everybody. Hopefully you guys get in here and check this out. This is the Political Matrix. I am one of your hosts, Marcus Young Morpheus Cage, and I'm here with a very special guest, a man that I've been wanting to talk to for quite some time, a man who not only him himself, but his organization, his publication, a lot of their work, many of us in the alternative media look to some of the work that they're talking about, whether we agree with it 100% or whether it's just parts that we agree with or not. They seem to always have a good temperature on a lot of the things that are going on. And so they're a very good place to reference. And a lot of their work is very, very, very thoroughly sourced. Without further ado, I'm very, very glad and excited to welcome Ryan Cristian, Last American Vagabond, to the show.
Thanks for having me on, brother. I appreciate that. And thank you for the intro. Yeah, it's long time being built. It's been decade plus, and I really am proud of what we put together. I've jokingly said over the last so many years that, these days it's necessary to be irritatingly objective, like to go above and beyond. It really is necessary today.
Definitely. I wanted to, I'm going to give you guys out in the audience, I'll be upfront with you. I'm going to give you only a little bit of a taste here on YouTube, and then we're going to switch over to Rockfin after this first topic, because I feel at this point, it's been around on the TikToks. It's been, it's been on X. It's been on every different platform. So it's not a strange theory to talk about it. So one of the first topics that I wanted to get into, and of course I definitely have more, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Maui fires. Something that I will throw out there, because I kind of had somewhat of a similar, I guess, view and guess of you on the first initial, like, something doesn't seem right about this. I do know that there's a lot of sketchy stuff going on here. I do know intentions of people, what they've been wanting to do with Maui and that particular area. I do know also about the 15-minute cities and all these different things part of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And another thing I would throw in there is that 85%, this surprised me that it was this high, that 85% of forest fires turn out to be product of arson. And so I was like, I don't know exactly how this went about or if this is an accident, but I'm leaning towards this being something else. And I kind of start thinking, there are different things that could do this. And then I ran across your live stream right before I was about to go on, talking about direct energy weapons. So I was wondering, what's some of your thoughts on this, Ryan?
Well, it's been evolving the entire time, and right out of the gate, I don't think I've ever concluded that I think that at least the evidence shows that directed energy weapons were used, or even that the location that I discovered on Maui was even necessarily involved if they were used, right? But my thoughts were that there was, first to start with the points you were making there, that there's an obvious reason to be skeptical about what happened. Whether we're talking land grabs or we're talking the larger kind of Great Reset mentality, as much as some people may perceive these as conspiracy theory, it's obvious that they're not. I mean, they're openly, publicly discussed, and whether or not people might decide to take surreptitious action for their own benefit is obviously always possible, or whether they might decide to do something for, like we have the climate change overlap, right? Where, like, to your very important point about arson, which they're finding that about the Greek fires, about Canadian fires, almost all of it seems to come back to arson. And even then they're still going, well, fine, arson, but then still climate change. It's like, it doesn't logically make much sense. The point is that you can see how people might act irrationally in the mindset that they need to do something like that to wake people up to the reality they think is happening. So the point is, people would literally start fires to wake you up to climate change, as ridiculous as that sounds. And that's actually part of it, or could be. So all these things are playing a factor. Like, that's one thing I've said early on this is, let's not miss the forest for the trees. Like, same thing with East Palestine. We need to make sure, as much as we obviously should look for the bigger possibilities, the bigger connective conspiracies, we make sure we also don't miss the crimes that we can prove immediately, right? The cover up in East Palestine that's still going on, or the fact, Maui, like the way they chose to turn the sirens off, chose to turn the water off, which have all been admitted to. The guy even resigned. That we have unquestionable video of police holding people inside the fire zone while you could see that the only reason they were doing so is they were ordered to. Now, again, maybe there was a reason. Maybe there was a failure of communication. That doesn't remove accountability. Those are crimes, in my opinion. People died because of those choices. So, I mean, you could argue with the word crime. The point is, all that's important. Now, into the direct energy weapon possibility. Now, the only reason when I first heard that story, I've always, first of all, they're very real. I don't know why that's even a possible topic in all this, that they're not even a real thing, other than whether you question that the government has admitted them was all to make you think they're real. I would get that kind of a perspective, but they've been admitted to. Let's put it that way. They've been in. I've seen the technology, the patents. I think it's very real, and I think you can prove that. This has been since the 70s. They've talked about this. The 90s, it's been openly admitted, and and so on. So the point is, they're very real. In California, in the Paradise Fires, I saw some really uncomfortable anomalies, that I was early in that, going like, this does not make sense to me. I talked to firemen. There's a very famous fire chief, retired, who speaks on the record, basically going, I don't know how you can explain this other than things like direct energy weapons, so there's a lot of real things to consider there. And I wasn't sure how I ended up feeling about that, but that opened me up to like, okay, this is, I think, something that we should consider very real. But there was a lot of misinformation even then, a lot of very aggressive lies about, all sorts of things. And then other things that I talk to firemen, they're like, we do that literally every time, like using drones to drop embers to create a fire line. That could still be used to start a fire, and we should ask that. But just catching those drones in the air, dropping them, is not proof of something else. It could, usually isn't. So my point is, bringing this into Maui, immediately I started seeing those arguments. And even same old videos. Oh, there's that video from 2015. It's a lens flare they always use in this. All these examples, even though you can pretty much prove the tech is not visible the way it's used today, right? So early I was dismissive, pretty much. And I don't want to say dismissive, just very skeptical and stuff. But I, as always, as you know, I'm like, let's find out. Let's step into this, open their mind to the possibility. And like the first thing, I don't even know how I stumbled into this. I forget how I was looking at Maui in particular, overlap with military. And this, instead of investigating right down the path of what's in front of you, stand back and like, let's ask bigger questions. And I discovered that there's what's called the Directed Energy Directorate on Maui. I almost fell out of my chair. Yeah. Really? I'm like, it's like, dang, I almost didn't want to get into this story necessarily, because I felt like it was a lot of hype, like that it's real possibly, but still a lot of hype. And so basically I ended up diving in and realizing, man, this is an important location where the guy on the record admits that they delivered the very first operational directed energy weapon to the military from this location. And then that they have an operational system called Thor. I forget what the acronym stands for, but of course they love their acronyms, Thor, that's operational on the location there. And then you've got supercomputing Maui sites. All of these are military. So then I'm going, okay, well, I can't not report this. Like, I have to make sure people see this. And so I put that tweet out. Here's what everyone's missing. Like, this is the location. But then, of course, that gets a lot of momentum from people that are saying, like, that's proof that they were used. And, that thing goes on. So all that being said, it's kind of a long explanation. I think it's important, though, to include all that, is that I think it's very possible that these things could always be used, or even more so, like, what if it was a test? What if this was a test of this new system that went awry? Or, or it was a test and then said, well, let's just get rid of these people that were bitten, the Lahaina, don't forget, they've been trying to get rid of those people in industry and corporate real estate. I've been trying to get these people to move for a long time. So it's hard to see that overlap. But again, I'm at a point where I don't think I see any evidence that was a connection. You could then go into the things you can prove, right? That Hawaiian Electric only spent $250,000 on fire safety the entire year and put every other dollar they had into the green energy direction. That's ridiculous. So right there, that's one of those points. I mean, that should be a huge point. They should be accountable for that. And all they're doing is getting kind of a slap on the wrist so far. I don't think they're going to get anything but fines. Same thing happened to PG&E. It ultimately benefited them. They charge more now. They can turn off, So yeah, that's where I think we stand now. And also we have video of the power lines collapsing and then literally creating fires. So it's in real time on the 8th. You can see that. So that's part of it, whether there was something else that happened. But there's this overlap today of like all these blue things that they, weird, all the blue things left. Something about this feels very, very, I'm not going to say it's false. I've seen the video of the laser not hitting that, but as I understand that technology, it's not just like blue things don't get affected. It's that you can set that technology to affect or not affect certain things. So it's weird that that video kind of got taken and then used about only blue things. And then the argument becomes, well, okay, so if the laser didn't burn the blue, what about the fire? This hurricane fire that covers everything, they're going to not burn the blue things. So I don't know. There's a lot of hype. Anyway, sorry, I get in my rants and I don't stop.
No. Good, you're good. You're good. Because when you were talking about that, it is definitely military technology that, and you've heard about the patents and stuff. On the other side of it, I remember when they were working on putting the railgun on some of the destroyers. And another thing that they started talking about was a lot of laser technology and laser weapons that they were going to put on naval vessels. Shock to most people, there is a very famous naval installation, which is right out there in Hawaii. And I'm not going to go into everything that possibly goes on there or doesn't go on there. But I mean, those are things to keep in mind. And then just knowing
that would make sense next to the directorate of the U.S. Air Force, which runs that, right? So they're working together for the same tech. That makes perfect sense.
Exactly. And so one thing I try to tell people is, I said, the problem is most people, when they think of these so-called elites or predatory class, what they underestimate is when we see like these Bond movies and stuff, know that this is not an exaggeration of how some of these people think. When you're so far removed from people, it's very easy to see whole entire groups of people as just an experiment. I mean, on a little bit smaller level, but still a large level. In the military, a general might send a whole entire battalion, basically many of them on a suicide mission for a larger objective to win a bigger prize or bigger area to possibly stop a war. And when you start thinking in such Machiavellian type terms, where does that end when you're that far up on that level? And we do know about a lot of the wealthy elite who live out there, who have been going after that. And then we've heard the stories about companies trying to evict a lot of the people who didn't lose their homes directly after, when they're not behind on payments and anything like that. And they're just ready to bump them out for that land. And so that's another thing which kind of made me like, something doesn't seem right about this.
Well, if I can comment on the realtor side of it, I think what's important to remember is that not even an opinion, that would have happened no matter what caused the disaster. That's important to remember. It doesn't mean it's not suspicious. We should always factor in all the data points. But again, these realtors and there are a lot of very slimy, kind of sharky people, right? So the point is that in this case, they were obviously already online. They all know, especially if they're in the Hawaiian Islands, that's a sought after location. And so suddenly something happens. They're like, oh, okay, get everything moving. Let's call people. Let's get, let's see if we can benefit. So that's going to happen either way. But then on top of the point about whether or not, like, I think from a larger perspective, what we would talk about would be, potentially the Oprah, Bezos, Zuckerberg, that would make sense. They can move mountains. And analogy wise, they literally can quite literally, create. I mean, I'm not going to say that we know that they would create a fire to kill people to do that, but I wouldn't say that's not out of their realm of possibility, or at the very least,
everything.
Yeah. Or that they wouldn't, maybe here's a way you could abstractly look at this to where it would amount to the same thing. These people are leaning in, which they are very acutely involved in the local politics, and the local zoning and everything, which they can spend $1 billion and make something happen if they want to. They can lean in with lobbyists to create the push, to create the reason Hawaiian Electric doesn't put money into the fire thing, create the perfect situation. Maybe get companies to like the sugarcane plant that ended up going away and left like this barren area that caused one of the reasons why it was easy to be start a fire. So the point is, you could have created these circumstances. And even if you may not be the one to kind of flick a cigarette in there and go, oh, let's see what happens, you could still realize that there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of things that happen. There's fires like this anyway in these areas that happen every year, right? So if you make it into a scenario where you've got teetering power lines and hurricanes are coming, I'm just saying it's something that is possible. And of course, people dismiss that as conspiracy theory because I guess it's not possible that a wealthy person would want to manufacture something that would benefit them. That's wild and crazy, right? But It's certainly possible, But the realtor part of it, I think, is important to be. Let's put everything in this conversation right now. Be very skeptical, because there's a lot of grifters and liars and people that are, hey, donate to me so I can go cover the story. And then what we should be doing is donating to Maui and helping people. There's a lot of people out there kind of trying to benefit. But what I don't know if I've seen any follow-ups in regard to evictions. So you tell me if you've seen more. But what I saw was one video of a rental building that didn't burn down that put out a notice that was going to evict everybody because they were going to sell it. Right.
Mhm.
But that gets, of course, that got TikToked and then TikToked again. So you got like 3 heads on the video. The point was the full video, if you could find it, goes on to say that the guy then got pressured to pull it back, didn't evict anybody, and was like, fine, I won't do it. Now, maybe that changed again. But my point was that was being turned into the mayor's evicting everybody, or all these people have got evicted. So you tell me, I'm interested if you've seen more of those notices and so on. I only saw the one, but because if that's happening, that is kind of a big story, like people being bumped out while this is going on.
Well, let me give this programming note to everybody. Everybody, start getting ready to switch over to Rockfin, because in a minute we're going to go into Rockfin. Got a couple more topics that are going to get a little bit more dicey, and I want us to be able to speak freely as possible. I have seen one other video, but like you said, there's always the fact that somebody owns this building. What's most profitable when it comes to it, and I mean, we do live in a capitalistic nation. That's people are going to follow what makes the most sense for them, and so it's very possible they say, you know what, there's a good time for me to make a killing to get out of this. So it could just be one person deciding that they want to do it, and then when they caught that backlash of how it looked optically, they're like, let me back away from this. I heard one other, but it's the same situation, and they got that heat, and then they backed off also. But so I haven't heard of anybody actually going through with it, but I have heard that that's something that at least 2 different buildings were in the same similar situation.
It's gross either way. I mean, the idea that you would do this at a time when people are desperate, people lost family members, hey, it's your life and your building. It's up to your prerogative, but that's pretty gross in my opinion. Like, give it a couple of months, man. You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to, you could still make some money, people are such, anyway.
Yeah. Did you hear about the people who, some of them lived, that like they grew up in that area, Lahaina, and then they moved like the towns, a little bit away from there. And because that they weren't residents and they were trying to come back to help family, and they were not allowing them to come back because they didn't already have some kind of hotel reservations.
Well, see, and this is another good point to talk about. So there's a lot of this going on where I too feel that I'm very suspicious about the way that the area is being controlled, and there's this weird dynamic. I've already pointed this out in a couple of shows where they're like it's like what happened with COVID-19, where they act like we're just going to put a wall between you and the information, not because we're hiding anything, but because those conspiracy theorists are going to use this against you. So really what they're doing is hiding the truth, blaming us because we're highlighting that. So in the same thing here, you got this dynamic where they're acting like, we're hiding this and keeping you out because people are going to abuse this. Like somebody's asking about how many children are missing. And the guy's like, it's a very valid question. Yeah. Right. I mean, and one you could very clearly, we know that, right. We know that it's an island. There's limited people here. It's been a week past, how many people are accounted for, how many are missing. The point is he freaked out and was like, oh, it only takes one person to ruin they're treating like your kindergartners, So that's kind of what I think is happening, is they're creating this dynamic where, and maybe some of them believe it. You're putting up walls because we don't want you to misrepresent the truth. I don't believe that though. I think at the core, it's kind of controlling the flow of information, but the point about stop people from coming in, on one side of it, you go, well, it's a crime scene, I guess, but that's not what they're saying. It's a natural disaster, but there's always an investigation. They don't want to really say that because then we're going to go crime scene, which we should, but that's what I mean. The dynamic where they're almost intentionally lying, but because you're the liar, it doesn't make sense. It makes as much sense as doing dangerous things for your safety. I always make fun of during COVID, but yeah, back to your specific point. I do understand why letting somebody in outside of the island now, unless they're bringing lots of resources, is sort of, you're going to step in and take needed resources. I actually understand that. But at the same time, there needs to be some kind of an open dynamic about this, because there are people that have a right to go see their families. There are people that I've seen an example of this, people that live there that aren't even able to come back because, that doesn't make sense to me. I get resources, but this isn't being dealt with honestly. And I think that's very clear to everybody, to what degree and why we should be questioning these things.
All right. Yeah. So at this point, everybody, make sure you guys all switch over to the Rockfin side. We're going to end this stream here. So I'm gonna end this, and then we'll give you guys all like a couple of minutes to file in, so that you guys don't miss anything. But make sure at this point, hop over to the Rockfin site. For those who are not familiar with that, we're on Rockfin. Go to at the Political Matrix. It shouldn't be hard to find us, but we will see you guys all over there. And thank you for everybody who tuned in on the YouTube side. Let's see. Where is it at? All right, and remove.